Good morning and welcome to the webinar on PBS Into the Future. My name is Michelle and I'll be your webinar moderator. Today you will hear from Scott Britton, Project Manager of the PBS Review at the NHVR. Scott will give us an overview of the latest trends in PBS fleet development, work underway to evolve PBS standards, and an update on the NHVR's PBS reform proposal. Like always, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. If you have a question, please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen during the session. Questions will be answered at the end of the session. Today's webinar will be recorded and uploaded to the NatRoad website and YouTube channel. So welcome, Scott. Over to you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the warm introduction, Michelle. Look, I won't cover off what we've got on the slate for today because Michelle's done that perfectly. What I'll do is I'll move straight on to the next slide when my mouse decides to react. So today, within that broader context, I want to set the webinar within the context of two schemes. The first theme being that the PBS scheme itself has exceeded expectations. The second theme being the fact that the PBS scheme itself needs to evolve. So getting into the first theme then around the expectations, I want to start off by just providing a little bit of an overview of the history of the scheme, some of the key stats that underlie the scheme at the moment, and that's where we'll talk a bit about the fleet development and what we're currently experiencing in overall uptake of PBS combinations as part of this country's heavy vehicle fleet. So we all know that the PBS scheme was established to allow industry to achieve higher levels of productivity, safety, and even reduced environmental emissions, through innovative and optimized vehicle design. And that really provides an opportunity to match the right vehicle to the right freight task. Now, the PBS scheme itself has been subjected to a couple of regulatory impact assessments over the time. First one was back in 2004 when the original proposal for the creation of the PBS scheme was put before what was then known as COAG, so it's the Council of Australian Governments. That particular regulatory impact assessment at that time estimated that there'd be an uptake of around 3,250 combinations over an initial 10-year period from inception. Now we fast forward all the way through to 2012, and when we start thinking about the regulatory impact assessment that was completed for the establishment of the Heavy Vehicle National Law and thus the creation of the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator, that estimate was revised to around 14,000 combinations by the year 2030. Now, we are well and truly ahead of that. As you can see from that big bold number on the screen there, at the end of 2023, we ticked over 20,000 combinations in the scheme. We've seen unprecedented levels of growth in the last 5 years, and 2023 itself was an absolute record smasher, and I'll come to that in a moment. But this then really leads us to sort of pose a couple of key questions. First one being, is this what the scheme was really intended to be? And then the second element is, well, what is the actual function of the PBS scheme? Was it intended to be a regulatory mechanism? And our view on that is no, it was intended to allow for heavy vehicle innovation, but not to be a regulatory mechanism. However, we have limitations that are enshrined in the Heavy Vehicle National Law as it currently stands. So to put that into some perspective, you can see the sort of evolution of the PBS scheme as proportioned by combinations there on the slide and how that's changed over time. In the early years, the 20-metre 3-axle truck, 4-axle dog combination was effectively the market darling, so to speak. Over time, as other combinations have emerged through the scheme and access has been provided by road managers, that has changed a little bit. You can see through to 2023, the two most predominant combination types within the scheme are the truck and dog and the 30-metre A-double, collectively representing roughly 60% of all PBS combinations. Now, you're probably aware that we have, within the limitations of the existing law, looked at ways in which we can actually remove or try to effectively remove the 3-axle truck, 4-axle dog combination from the PBS process. We did that through the Class 3 truck and dog notice that we released some time ago. Now, the uptake of that notice hasn't been as successful as we thought. It is an approach that is available to us. It's probably not the best approach, but it is something that is, I guess, probably the only real avenue that we have that can be achieved under the law as it currently stands. I guess the basic process, and I will work on a few assumptions that people have an overall understanding of the law and the PBS scheme, but to touch on it quickly, PBS vehicles are a Class 2 vehicle under the law. And thus the PBS, to be a PBS combination, you must be a Class 2 vehicle because it's effectively an exemption from the requirements of the MDL. Now, to remove a vehicle from that process, we effectively had to transition that vehicle from Class 2 to Class 3, create a new notice, which then entails new access consent required from road managers, and thus, I guess, an issue arising in the sense that if you have an existing body of permits under Class 2, there is no incentive to actually shift your combination out of Class 2 and into Class 3. One, because you've already paid for the upfront costs of participating in the PBS scheme in terms of a design approval and a subsequent vehicle approval. But more importantly, you've paid for a body of permits that are associated with the access that you require to operate your particular business. You can see other types of combinations there that have evolved over time. B doubles, we have a few buses. The one that's starting to emerge a bit more now, and we believe that will grow as networks start to open up, is the prime mover and semi with 2-axle groups. Of course, we also have the 20-meter long prime mover semi combination in there, which at the end of 2023 had a healthy 12.5% of the overall scheme. To put it into a different perspective, and if anyone's on the call and had heard me present before, you'll know that I talk about the double steps, and you can see those in sort of the years 2014, 2015, 16 and 17, 18, 19 and onwards. You can sort of see that we have this double step that occurs over time, 2020 being a bit of an anomaly. That was the COVID era. However, you can also see there what I mentioned earlier, that 2023 was an absolute record smasher in terms of approved combinations joining the scheme. 3,950 combinations were added last year. Now, to put that in context, that's 70% year-on-year growth to 2022. Or another way of looking at it is to say that it's more than double, or roughly double, the average of the preceding 5-year period. So we've seen a very significant growth rate in 1 year alone. And you can see with these particular figures we've got on screen now, being through to end of February this year, we've had 551 combinations added already. Now, we will have another report in a couple of days as we come towards the end of another month. But we are currently experiencing 350 to 400 combinations a month joining the scheme. Now, we've got a few ideas as to why we've had such a big bump in that 1 year. Our thoughts are, evolving networks for the A-double in particular, things like the instant asset write-offs that are offered through federal government and the taxation system, delays in delivery from COVID orders, and the other one that we think is a significant contributor to the process is the only real wholesale change that we've managed to achieve in terms of reform of the PBS scheme to date, and that's the introduction of the generic tyre approach. We've made the compliance elements and operational flexibility that much better with that we believe that that's also had a contribution in terms of uptake of PBS combinations. Now you can see there in raw numbers through to the end of February this year, how the scheme has evolved in terms of combination type. It is dominated by a few combination types that are largely popular. The A-double is growing quite significantly. February 2024 was a 30% increase in design approvals on February 2023. So even in a year, we've seen a 30% increase in design approvals. So industry is starting to turn to the scheme. I should mention the other one that we believe is a contributor to that growth, and that's it's also associated with fleet renewal. So that's just there to set the scene and put a few things in the back of our mind. But within that, we can move then to theme number 2, and that's that the PBS scheme itself needs to evolve. Now, I mentioned at the outset that we believe that we know that the PBS scheme was never designed or intended to be a regulatory mechanism. PBS was established well and truly before the creation and commencement of the Heavy Vehicle National Law. There are elements that have transitioned, obviously, with the creation of the law. There are some elements that still sit outside and involve other organisations, but I'll come to that in a moment. And we believe that some of these elements need to evolve, they need to change, but more importantly, we actually need to take PBS from what it was originally intended to achieve, to embed some of those principles, ensure they carry through, and create, I guess, a sense of contemporization. The scheme has been highly successful in delivering innovation benefits in a couple of combination types. But we believe that it's now time for additional changes whereby those proven mature combination designs like that truck and dog or the 30-metre A double, those sorts of things need to move out of the PBS process into a common fleet, and that the PBS scheme itself should return to being really what we want to call the bastion of the weird, the wacky and the wonderful. It should be the process whereby you come and test new ideas, new innovations, new products, and really take heavy vehicle design to the next level. So the first element I want to touch on in terms of the evolution of the scheme is, of course, that of the PBS standards themselves. Back in 2019, in response to the NTC market review, Transport Ministers tasked the NHVR with undertaking a full review of the standards. Now, that work has been underway for a couple of years, and it is progressing at somewhat a glacial pace. Phase 1 commenced pretty much immediately after the direction provided by Transport Ministers. In that phase, we looked at the frontal swing standard, which was amended quite quickly. Pavement horizontal loading standard and the dynamic stability under braking standard were the next cabs off the rank in that regard. We've also just completed phase 2, which we completed late last year. And then we've also made a commencement on the work underway with phase 3 and 4. Now, I guess I really want to focus here on some of the elements or some of the challenges that we have in terms of actually ensuring that the scheme itself maintains contemporary best practice. We have a process in place, and I mentioned a moment ago the fact that we have other organisations involved. The PBS standards, while they were acknowledged in the Heavy Vehicle National Law upon its creation, they are actually a standalone document that sits outside. And the original delegate authority for the management of that document was the National Transport Commission. Now, that still remains, despite that transfer of day-to-day administration and responsibility for the scheme. Upon enactment of the Heavy Vehicle National Law, quite a few elements didn't transition to the NHVR. So we need to work very closely with the National Transport Commission in terms of affecting any changes to the standards as they currently exist. And more importantly, that process actually requires ministerial approval. Now, that ministerial approval subsequently means that we need sign-off from each jurisdiction in order to achieve that. Now, phase 1 of the standards review has, I guess, been the ultimate case study in, I guess, the frustration that can come in with that process. In May 2021, after a 2-year period, proposals to amend both the pavement horizontal loading standard and the dynamic stability under braking standard were put to transport ministers. The dynamic stability under braking standard was approved. The pavement horizontal loading pavement horizontal loading standard itself was also approved, but it was an in-principle approval. Now, that in-principle approval required us to go and work with one particular jurisdiction in order to undertake further work to ensure that that jurisdiction was satisfied that the revision to the standard would not create any sort of worsening or any additional impacts upon road infrastructure. Now, a further 2 years later, we have worked with that jurisdiction. September last year, we finally reached agreement. And since then, we have been working to progress the out-of-session approval of the Infrastructure Transport Senior Officials Committee, which is obviously the group that sits below the Transport Ministers, to actually achieve that final approval and allow us to actually get on with the job of amending the standard. So in the last couple of months, we have been working with both that jurisdiction and the Commonwealth Secretariat to get the appropriate briefing material in front of that committee in order for that sign-off to be achieved. Now, the implications of this particular standard are a revised approach to assessing the pavement horizontal load impacts, which is effectively, in engineering speak, a calculation of the shear force created perpendicular to the drive wheel at certain conditions. Now, that calculation will be undertaken by a PBS assessor as part of actually putting together a design application and tracking that through. The implementation of that particular standard itself is quite simple. It is effectively going to be a cutoff date for the existing standard, a commencement date for the new, and a clean transition to the way in which a PBS assessor will make an application for a design approval. All existing combinations will be grandfathered, and it'll just be a matter of determining whether or not a vehicle was approved under the old standard or the new standard. The dynamic stability under braking standard, however, is presenting us with a few more implementation challenges. The approval from transport ministers for that was to bring the braking requirements for PBS combinations up to speed with the latest Australian design rule, and in some instances actually exceed that. We also have a grandfathering provision that will carry through with that. So two key aspects there. So from commencement, all combinations will be required to meet the latest ADR in relation to braking performance. So that includes things like roll stability function and some of those latest technologies. Where the standard will exceed the ADR is that it will also require ABS to be fitted to dollies. Then in terms of the implementation side, if you have an existing vehicle approval and you continue to operate in accordance with that vehicle approval, those combinations are grandfathered. Where that has an impact then is where you then where an operator would then seek to actually amend their existing vehicle approval. At that point of amendment, there would be a requirement to then actually upgrade to meet to the latest standard. Now that work is progressing. We are hopeful that if we can get the final approval to implement the pavement horizontal loading standard in the next couple of weeks, we'll be in position to actually implement these two as the one package and thus have a seamless transition period with dates that are aligned. It has been a little bit of a dance thus far to determine whether or not we would be able to achieve that. We believe that one set of implementation dates makes it simple for everyone, that won't lead to any further confusion, and it's just a matter of here are the key dates, we'll move on. Now, in terms of the dynamic stability under braking and the implementation dates, we are going to have a long notice period. Our current thinking is that there'll be somewhere around 6 months from announcement to actual commencement, but then a transition period for all existing combinations in between before they are compelled to upgrade of at least 18 months is our current thinking. But a 12 to 18 month period is in there. That detail will be known when we get closer to the implementation date, which we hope isn't too far away. So then in terms of other success stories, and I've mentioned this one already, is the only wholesale change that we've managed to achieve in terms of anything significantly reforming the PBS scheme to date, and that's the introduction of the generic tyre approach. Of course, we commenced that on 1 December 2022. We did deem all existing vehicles to comply, so it is possible that you have an existing vehicle approval that reads the way it did prior to 1 December 2022. And we had issued advice to on-road compliance officers in how to actually manage compliance in respect to that document. However, if you have brought your if you have had a change to your vehicle approval document for some other purpose, NHVR will have already updated your vehicle approval to reflect a generic tyre approach with the simplified table instead of the previous approach whereby tyres were listed by brand and model. From 1 March 2023, of course, it was compulsory for all design applications to be made using the generic tyre approach. Of course, as I've mentioned, the benefits, simplified approach to the listing of tyre options on the vehicle approval. It simply now lists the tyre size, the load index, and the position for the vehicle. We have undertaken that tyre list conversion, and we are doing so when those documents are actually presented for another purpose. There's no compulsion to do so. And of course, the biggest thing for industry is the fact that you can use any brand and model as long as it meets those size, load rating, and configuration requirements. The big thing here is that the generic tyre approach also allowed us to actually firm up what was previously a bit of an unwritten policy position, and that's in relation to the use of the retreads. They are allowed on all positions on the combination except for the steer axle of the motor vehicle. So in terms of the evolution of the scheme itself, and you may recall the previous work that we released in relation to what we call the PBS 2.0 discussion paper, we had a series of proposals there that we put forth for all PBS stakeholders to consider. And in that, we really put forward the changes that we believe are required to take the PBS scheme from where it currently is through to that next generation. So the two key aspects, and I did sort of focus on the standards earlier. The key aspects here, one, we need to shift the ownership of the standards to the NHVR. As I mentioned, currently sitting with the NTC, it creates additional elements in the process that's not there. In line with that sort of the themes that came from the Kanofsky review, let the regulator regulate within a framework. We need some tiered approval processes to actually manage those standards. The view is where we're talking about, sort of minor changes to the standards, these things should be able to be signed off by the NHVR board. The board has been placed by transport ministers. We think that the board is an appropriate place for that level of approval. Major wholesale changes to the scheme, which have a broader implication. We believe that in those instances, they should still go through to transport ministers, and as the highest sort of level of authority, ministers can make those decisions. Things like the generic tyre approach as a wholesale change, that would be the sort of stuff that would go to ministers. But in terms of that day-to-day management of the PBS standards, that sort of continuous evolution as technology changes and updates, we should be able to manage that and a rolling process moving forward. Also within this, you may be aware that we have a thing called the PBS Review Panel. Now it's comprised of jurisdictional representatives. Its role has changed over time. In the very early years of PBS, it had a very intrinsic role in the actual approval combination of combinations and granting of the vehicle approval. That has really shifted away from that. and it is now within the law as an advisory mechanism to the regulator in relation to those combinations of vehicle approvals. But increasingly, what we're seeing is that the panel's being focused on matters that aren't really related to the way in which NHVR applies the standards. That is, to ensuring that we're issuing design of vehicle approvals for combinations that do in fact meet the requirements of PBS. We're seeing that it's getting more and more into other related areas, but not directly in line with where its, I guess, intent is. And the final aspect here was the use of interim standards. When we proposed interim standards as a way of identifying opportunities for new technologies to enter into the scheme, be trialed, tested before we actually proceed through to the adoption of a standard per se, and also use it as a safe, I guess a safe mechanism whereby some real world trialing of particular technologies may aid the development of a standard or evolution of an existing standard. Now, the big aspect of this, of course, is ultimately comes down to access. A lot of time and effort is made by an operator to obtain a design approval, to obtain a vehicle approval, the capital investment that's made in terms of actually then completing manufacturing of the combination, to then still have this big question mark in terms of access. And that even happens with some of those mature combinations that we have there today, like that truck and dog or an A double, a B double. We still have challenges in relation to networks for that. So really what we have envisaged in this particular aspect of our reform proposals is this idea of a PBS life cycle. In a nutshell, it should be, effectively genesis of an idea all the way through to transition to the everyday fleet. An idea comes in, it's tested, it's evaluated, it's given the big green tick to say, yes, we believe that this vehicle is safe. It's not going to have any adverse impact on the road network in terms of infrastructure or safety. It can operate. As we get more and more experience with that combination, its safety performance becomes known. We can then proceed through to what we're sort of labeling templating, and then we can transition that vehicle into the fleet. Now, we did talk about this in the PBS 2.0 space, sort of through two spaces within the scheme. So while they would still be known as PBS vehicles as a broader label, what we've really envisaged is sort of two spaces. The first space being the innovation side of the scheme, or PBS sort of as we know it, the vehicles that are getting tested against the standards that are entering for that first time. We're getting the knowledge and the benefit of understanding those vehicles on the net and their operation on the road network over time. And then was this idea that we had of the high performance fleet, and that is effectively a space where we transfer those mature vehicles to. It's still within PBS, but effectively they are the vehicles that are no longer required to go through that design approval or vehicle approval process. And that's the demonstration of maturity. We would then envisage that we would have a library of templates available on the NHVR website, those templates being akin to a PBS design approval. They would be there and available to anyone who wished to operate a PBS combination. They could simply take that approved design, have the vehicle manufactured, and then with notices available, they would then be able to operate that network, that vehicle on that particular network that's under notice. So for those very mature and common aspects of the PBS scheme, if the particular combination met an operator's needs, and also the network gave them the level of access that they were looking for within their operations, then we would have a ready-made solution in terms of vehicle and network. Now, that doesn't withstand the fact that PBS networks are obviously evolving over time, and that we have different vehicle types emerging all the time. So there's still that growth element that needs to happen behind all of that. And more importantly as well, while the template will be there as, I guess, the common version of a particular combination, If that particular template doesn't quite match an operator's needs, they would still then also be free to go through the PBS process for a combination that that sort of does not meet the envelope that's created by that particular template. So in terms of the scheme needing to evolve, and look, the Konofsky recommendations and the review that was taken as part of the Heavy Vehicle National Law process has quite a few elements here that are quite pertinent to the evolution of the PBS scheme. Now, let the regulator regulate. We need some of those other documents that are intrinsic to the PBS process to be transferred to the NHVR, and a modern contemporary process for managing this scheme in its entirety put in place. We need to get through that process of updating the standards and having a flexible approach to management of the standards moving forward. That streamlined governance is one, to do with the overarching administration, but then two, to actually manage the life cycle of that PBS, of a vehicle through PBS. That is quite an important element of the reform that we're proposing. So the process to change a standard isn't working. I mentioned the pavement horizontal loading stuff before. We're now at 4.5 years or thereabouts into the process of revising that particular standard. We believe that we will be there pretty shortly, but that does not really, at the end of the day, represent the best contemporary practice, nor does it allow vehicles to, in PBS, to evolve or represent the best possible combinations that we could be putting onto the road at any one given time. The other aspect that's not working with this is the jurisdictional support for reform. So our PBS 2.0 proposals had 3 key models that we put forward. Lo and behold, we had a lot of feedback from jurisdictions, from industry associations, operators, road managers, and the like. What we could say from that process is the fact that there's probably an overarching agreement that the PBS scheme does need reform and that it does need to evolve. It's just that there's no agreement or consensus on what that change or what that evolution should actually look like. So while we've consulted on our vision for the scheme and we've achieved that sort of that overarching consensus that there is a need for evolution, we're really at this stage now. We have to overcome the resistance to change. Now, we want a more ambitious agenda. Now, if we're critical upon ourselves, and I put my hand up as the project manager leading this particular piece of work, our reform proposals under PBS 2.0 weren't overly ambitious. They were quite conservative. They were largely administrative improvements. They were largely associated with creating end-to-end processes. We actually need a more ambitious agenda. If we think back to the original Council of Australian Government objectives for PBS when it was established, we're talking about improved environmental performance, improved productivity, improved safety. Those broader objectives, we can say, yes, we have achieved that because the number of combinations that have come onto the road to date have contributed towards those broader objectives. But in some ways, the current restrictions are acting like a glass ceiling. PBS isn't currently able to achieve its true potential. And we need to work with all stakeholders to ensure that we can overcome that resistance for change and really show how PBS can contribute not only to environmental emission reductions and environmental performance, not only to road safety, but more broadly, how transition of a heavy vehicle fleet to a more productive fleet actually supports the broader Australian economy. We also need industry support and advocacy behind this. On the next slide in a second, I'm going to talk about the timelines and where we're at. But to really harp on this one point for a moment, we really need industry to be working with us. We are working away on this stuff. We have been doing a lot of work behind the scenes to advance our proposals, both from a technical perspective and then also a policy perspective. But when we bring all that together, we're going to be coming forth with a new agenda for the evolution of the PBS scheme. We will need industry support to back that in, and we will need to, I guess, create a coalition of the willing in terms of that advocacy approach to achieving much needed change to evolve the scheme itself. So where are we? Well, obviously we're just pre-Easter 2024, and we've been doing a lot of work in and around that case for reform piece on that right-hand side. So we spent roughly 10 months developing that PBS 2.0 discussion paper. We did a lot of pre-consultation with industry associations, with jurisdictions, a lot of pre-testing of ideas. Despite all of that, the response was still quite divergent in relation to the discussion paper once it was ultimately released. We did that formal consultation over the sort of 5-month period from the end of November 2022 through to March 2023. We spent a lot of time going through that feedback, discussing it with jurisdictions, working with industry associations to understand perspectives. And we're now in the midst of actually pulling together our next piece that we want to put together in this space. So that's really this more ambitious reform agenda. And we're talking about accelerating changes to the heavy vehicle national law to expedite reform. Now, we're doing that through the development of a position paper, which is very close to being complete. I haven't got an exact date for its launch at this point, but I am very hopeful that it's not too far into the distant future. Quite simply, we're bringing forth an agenda that is seeking to accelerate the reform of PBS, to achieve some of those changes to the heavy vehicle national law, to embody changes, to do the sorts of things that I talked about. Transition responsibility to the NHVR for various schemes of the scheme administration that we don't currently hold, to allow us to transition mature combinations out of the scheme without having any impact on access. And that's that class 2 to class 3 challenge I mentioned earlier. To create template vehicles so that we have an ability to capture the learnings from PBS and make that more broadly available to the rest of the transport industry. And then we're also going to work with industry bodies to actually drive that forward. The other aspect then is the technical side of this. And we've actually made a start on working through the copious amount of information and data that we have from the body of design approvals and vehicle approvals that we have to understand those vehicles and start working towards a common template design. A key aspect of this particular work is to focus initially on the A-double, the 30-metre A-double. The networks for that particular combination are growing under notice. So we are looking specifically within the bounds of the current law at how do we create a template vehicle that matches the networks we currently have under notice. Those networks are very mature or maturing in Victoria and New South Wales. There's some stuff emerging in terms of South Australia, and then still some challenges in Queensland. However, we're looking to design templates that meet the envelopes contained within that particular notice, and that's the high productivity, the class 2 high productivity notice that I'm referring to. We're looking to create a series of templates for a 30-metre A-double that will meet that objective. So whether that's an A-double tipper, a skell type combination, a curtain sider, we're looking at developing templates that meet that particular aspect so that we can create that seamless end-to-end journey that starts off with the innovation and the initial concept that is tested, tried, proven, then templated. Once templated, it's married to that network. What we then need is to get to a point whereby we can then actually expedite through with a complete mature model that then says we no longer need a vehicle approval for that particular combination. And that way we are achieving an objective of having PBS, or at least that innovation side of the scheme, available to innovate, and then that sort of mature side of the scheme to a point where the advantages of innovation have been captured and have been achieved, and they are made available on a level playing field, so to speak, compared to that of a prescriptive combination. Look, that's pretty much it for the end of my slides. I'm more than happy to take any questions at that point.
Thank you, Scott. Yes, we don't have any questions at the moment. If anybody would like to get some more information, you're welcome to email info@natroad.com.au, or you can email the address on the screen, and we can pass any inquiries from our end over to Scott as well.
Yep.
Thank you again for making the time to talk to us today. We really appreciate it, and everyone have a great day.
Thanks, Michelle. Pleasure
Thank
being with
you.
you.